Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. I have a very special guest with me coming straight from Brooklyn, New York, Meltem Demirors, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at Coinshares. Meltem, it's great to have you.
Yeah, we finally made it happen. We did it.
I'm excited to chat with you. There's a lot I want to discuss with you, but I want to start with your background. Where are you from? Where did you grow up?
So my family's originally from Turkey. So my name Meltem means breeze that comes from the Mediterranean. And then my parents both Turkish from a small rural community in Turkey. And then I was born and raised in the Netherlands. So grew up speaking Dutch and Turkish, learned English when I was 10 when I moved to the United States, have been here since then. So yeah, like kind of all over, international. The majority of my family still lives in Turkey. I'm a big fan of the Turkish crypto community. So for all of you watching, çok memnunum. Yani Türk olduğuma çok memnunum. It's a little bit of Turkish for you. And then my background, did the usual, went to college, after college, worked a corporate job, worked in the energy industry, and got to do some pretty fun Wild West, swashbuckling type stuff in emerging asset plays. So I worked in the shale gas industry, then steam assisted gravity drainage, or SAGD, oil extraction, where you're basically getting oil out of rock deposits, Arctic Circle oil, mining equipment, shipping, utilities, you name it. If it was big, heavy, ugly, messy, expensive, I was involved. Those sort of my mantra. Then did what every good corporate employee does. I had a quarter life crisis. I was like, what do I do with my life? I went to graduate school at MIT to go figure it out. Around that time, I also got excited. I got into Bitcoin. I was like, this is super weird. These people are insane. Well, what does it mean to have money that isn't issued by the state? What does it mean to have peer-to-peer transactions? And went down that whole rabbit hole. And then as I was leaving grad school, I was like, I don't have a job. I don't want any of the jobs. They all sound terrible. And then I met Barry Silbert, who was building DCG. He was like, do you want to come build this thing? I was like, cool. sounds weird. Sounds fun. Sounds interesting. Let's do it. For the last 6 years now, I've been in this industry working primarily in investment firms and primarily with startups and with corporates and investors, and really trying to be that bridge between all of these different groups of people. We're trying to figure out what's going on in this industry. And then I love good memes, and this industry has the best memes.
Absolutely.
So doing it for the memes.
Very cool. Now, what was your first encounter with Bitcoin? Did you hear it in passing? Did a friend tell you about it? Did you see online?
No, it's my brother. So my brother and I, so when I first moved to the States when I was 10, I didn't know any English, right? So here I am. I moved to the States. I don't know a word of English. And so it was summer. It was actually the middle of the summer when I moved to the States. So everyone's at summer camp. I had no friends. I didn't speak the language. And I was like, I went from living in the Netherlands to living in a medium-sized town in Michigan that had more churches than people. And
wow.
It was totally different. I was like, wow, this is weird. So I did a lot of reading, but also got really into games, particularly RPG games. At that time, the first PlayStation was coming out, if you'll recall. So there was, there were a lot of fun role-playing games like Zelda and Final Fantasy and these sort of narrative-based series. And so I started getting into online chat rooms, and these were the early days of AOL. So hang out on the internet in these sub communities, trying to figure out cheat codes or side quests to get the special spell, doing those things. And so my brother and I, that was something we had done together, right? And so my brother is really into the sort of cybersecurity space, and he pinged me, I want to say in 2012, he's like, look at this Bitcoin thing. And I was like, okay. So I went on Reddit and 4chan, as one does. And I was like, dank memes, A, but B, what is going on? And then from there, I think one thing that always comes up for me is I used to always say oh, I'm not a political person. but then I realized I'm actually an extremely political person. And Bitcoin, in a way, helped me realize this. And in a way, what really captured my imagination was the first time I sent a Bitcoin transaction. Right? So the idea that I have no idea who this person is, I'm just going to put in a string of characters, and then that's a transaction this person's going to get. It blew my mind, because you've never really experienced that before. Like, even being a child of the internet, I'd never really experienced that. And that's when I was like, whoa. Scary, cool, scary, very cool. Yeah. So that's still my relationship with Bitcoin. I'm like, this is so cool. It's so scary. It's so exciting. Oh my God, I'm terrified. Is that the right address? So.
No, yeah, and that's, I think, initially, I think almost a lot of folks experience, because it's like, wow, this huge address, it's like a hash code. Like, what am I doing here? Is, I'm used to meltem@gmail.com or something, right? And it's like, but the benefits of Bitcoin and the value it brings and the differentiators are so great that once you get past the technological standpoint, it's pretty cool. And I'm surprised that you mentioned you went down the 4chan rabbit hole, which can be crazy in itself. Very cool. So I want to ask, as far as what you're holding in your crypto portfolio, and I'll preface this question by saying, saying it's not financial investment advice, but sounds like you're holding Bitcoin. Are you holding anything else?
Yeah, so actually, I have been following a disclosure policy since early 2017. So if you go to my website, meltemdemirors.com, I have a personal disclosure policy. You can see any positions I hold that are worth over $1,000, which is the threshold that the U.S. House of Representatives uses. I think it's just important as an investor and someone who's on social media, just be really transparent about what my incentives are. So I hold Bitcoin. I hold all the Bitcoin forks still. I hold Ether and Ethereum Classic. And then there's a number of other projects. Tezos is one I've talked about a bit. I've been involved in the Tezos community since it started. And then there are a number of other sort of projects. But yeah, you can see it all there. But look, at the end of the day, I think my number one love and the thing that continues to be really exciting to me is Bitcoin in many ways. And a lot of what I spend my time talking about is Bitcoin, just because I think it's the most accessible and it's sort of a good starting point. And frankly, for most people, exposure to Bitcoin is going to get you sort of broadly diversified exposure to the crypto space, because the degree of correlation within the space is still quite high.
Sure.
So for most people who are looking to allocate to the crypto asset class, Bitcoin is a good proxy, just in the sense that, for people who want to allocate to tech, right, the FANGs are a good proxy. So a lot of my focus, just in terms of what I talk about, has been Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I think it's important, I think, as the path into crypto and digital assets, it's important to know the history and why Bitcoin was created. I think sometimes people skip that and they kind of play with it as though it's monopoly money, but there's a big movement here. There's a big change, I think, a paradigm change. And maybe you can talk a bit about that the disruption that Bitcoin has caused. And we see central banks trying to build their digital currencies. We see Facebook trying to build their own digital currency, and all the other folks trying to build their own, and all because of Bitcoin. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so I think you said it pretty succinctly when you said Bitcoin is a movement. The way I think about Bitcoin is really first and foremost as a social movement. Bitcoin is a lot of different things. And I have this great chart I made about, Bitcoin being alchemy. It started out sort of in the metaphysical and this idea phase of like, what happens if we separate state and money? But there were these political ideas, there were these philosophical ideas, there were economic principles that were embedded in sort of the creation of Bitcoin. The fact that the first Bitcoin block that was ever mined contained, the headline from the Times saying banks on brink of second bailout, in and of itself was like an inherently political act. Yep. Bitcoin was designed and implemented as a social movement first and foremost. And I think in some ways, the way that Bitcoin has evolved over the last 11 years. The cult of mystery around Satoshi, this sort of leaderless persona that has a strong ethos around this idea of the sovereign individual, sort of self-actualization through like this technological form of money. I think a lot of that has elements of religiosity. It's going to sound very weird, but I think we're entering this phase, you know, where we're evolving beyond Judeo-Christian religions, but people are like, there's this other undercurrent where we're shifting towards, okay, I'm going to get metaphysical because this is fun for me. Okay. So I think there's this really interesting sort of schism that happens when you separate science and sort of the observable phenomena from the spirit of something, right? And I think for a lot of people, the issue we have is the world we live in today. There is no longer this spirit or this sort of metaphysical like feeling to things. A lot of things are very much reduced to like what's observable. We're very sort of binary in how we feel about things. We're either for or against, yes or no, black or white. And things are much more nuanced than that. And so what I think is so important about Bitcoin, it is science, it's math, it's you know, there are these immutable truths, but at the same time, the myth of Bitcoin and the story of Bitcoin and this sort of quasi-religious sort of elements, like a techno-religion in a way. I think that sort of gives Bitcoin that spirit and that sort of mystical essence that is so critical to fostering human creativity and imagination and giving people a sense of purpose. And so what I think is so cool is like, for the last 6 years, I've been 100% immersed in like this crazy Bitcoin community. They're my friends, they're my people. It's like my fam now. And so what's been interesting is for a lot of people, Bitcoin doesn't just become a hobby or an asset they have in their portfolio or like a thing they talk about on the internet. It becomes part of their identity. And I think that's really interesting in a way. And you see that in other technology communities as well. Like if you've hung out on like 4chan or Reddit or like the weird subcultures of the internet. And I'm a student of, you know, the subcultures. I like my weird internet subcultures, but there is sort of this interesting element of Bitcoin that's very tribal. And so I think that part of the story is something people don't talk about enough. I think we try to reduce Bitcoin down into like, here's the investment case for Bitcoin. I'm like, it's so much broader than that, because what we're talking about is sort of a spiritual shift in the same way that, you know, the Enlightenment through innovations in science and chemistry brought about a spiritual revolution. Like we're seeing similar parallels here, and different people have written about it. I thought Tur Demeester's piece on the Bitcoin Reformation was a really interesting sort of analogy that drew on the relationship between politics, philosophy, technology, and culture. So I think, you know, when I talk about Bitcoin, yes, it's deeply technical and scientific, but there's also an element of sort of the esoteric and the soul of Bitcoin. And then the one final thing I'll say, because I've been going for a while on this, is what I think is so interesting about Bitcoin versus everything else is so many, and this is really, you know, last summer when the Libra hearings were happening, when I was testifying in Congress, the only thing I wanted people to remember, and I think I said it like 15 times, Libra is not Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin is Bitcoin, and there's one Bitcoin. And it goes back to, I don't know who said it, but there's this quote that's, you know, you can copy many things, but the one thing you can never copy is a soul. And so what I think is so interesting is everyone is trying to copy Bitcoin from technology perspective and change different things about it, more scalable, faster transactions, you know, more privacy, whatever, pick your favorite feature or your least favorite feature, you know, you can just go absolutely feature crazy. But the one thing about Bitcoin that people really want to copy more than anything else is the strong community around Bitcoin and the culture of Bitcoin. And it's actually the one thing you can't copy, because you can't copy the soul of a thing.
I'm in much agreement with you, because I've thought about it. It's you talk about the, you know, kind of what it embodies, and it's freedom, enlightenment, this spark of a new age, I feel like, with blockchain. and just a more decentralized world. So I think those things feed into certain aspects of our human psyche and the things that we strive for, freedom and having liberty and the ability to be your own self and be your own bank, so to speak. So I certainly agree with what you're saying, and it absolutely makes sense. And I think to your point, it's fueling the movement and the growth. And sure, there's the financial aspect of it, but I think people recognize, yeah, okay, now we see the Bitcoin, its purpose, and what's, you juxtaposition of that is what's happening in the world. And it's really fueling the movement, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, one thing I'll add is I do think, like, I like to have a balanced perspective, right? I think it is very important. I think a lot of people look at Bitcoin just from one, perhaps overly optimistic perspective. One of the things that I've tried to write about and talk about a bit is, in a way, like, what we've also done with introducing Bitcoin to the world and sort of educating people about this technology and introducing these new models for consensus and distributed public ledgers. We've also introduced people to the idea of, like, fully auditable, no privacy hell world. And so in a way, the way I sort of position it, is I love sci-fi, so I talk about sci-fi a lot. If you think about, like, two dystopian futures, you have 1984 and you have Brave New World, right?
Sure.
And 1984 in some ways is sort of, authoritarian regime, anti-personal rights, like a boot stomping eternally on the face of humanity, was sort of Orwell's very, like, sort of encapsulating quote there. But 1984 is very much about systemic oppression. And that's certainly the approach we see to governance in some parts of the world. Over 70% of the world's population today lives in authoritarian regimes. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something important to keep in mind. Like, what we're building is tools for the revolution, but tools are just that. They can be used for good and for bad. Yeah. And then I think what we have in the other part of the world, the part of the world we live in, the other 30% of the world, is people live in perhaps regimes that are supposedly democratic. I would say they're like post-democracy, sort of oligarchic regimes, as we've seen during COVID, with, like, just the way that insiders, have benefited vastly from wealth creation via being close to the money printer. Yeah. Get into that. But I think we forget that there's also Brave New World, which is Huxley's view of the future, which is where we have used technology to stratify society. Everything has been designed with form and function in mind, and life becomes so meaningless that we consume soma, we consume, media, and everything's meaningless because nothing no longer has purpose. And so humans cease to imagine, cease to dream, cease to do anything useful. And so there's sort of these two extremes. And I think the one we always think about in Bitcoin is the authoritarian sort of 1984 world. But I think there's a very real world as well, where what we build ends up becoming so deeply integrated into our financial systems and political systems that at the point we realize what we've built, it becomes too late to extricate ourselves from it. And then what you end up living in is sort of like a Brave New World construct where it's just impossible to overcome. And so I think there's sort of these two sides. And, in the same way that tools can be used for amazing things, tools can also be used as tools of oppression. And so I think it's also important to remember, that Bitcoin isn't just about just taking your Bitcoin and putting them in Coinbase and trading whatever assets you want to trade. At the core, it's an exercise in understanding the responsibility that comes with a self-sovereign asset that you can self-custody, and being willing to take that responsibility and all of the things that come with that. I think it's been very depressing to see, people on one side arguing for freedom and, financial innovation and permissionless financial innovation. But then on the flip side, the minute they, mess up and something goes wrong, they're like, oh, I'm going to sue you. And it's like, well, you can't have both. And I'm not making, I'm not a lawyer. I have zero opinions on this. But you can't have both. So you kind of need to decide what side you want to be on. Sure. I got a pitch deck the other day for Bitcoin without the revolution. And I think a lot of people, what they're advocating for is Bitcoin without the revolution. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense.
They have to go hand in hand. It's certainly, especially, I think folks at its on its face, sometimes they have misconceptions about Bitcoin. It's a Ponzi scheme. It's this, it's that. But I think if they understand the core message, right, the first block, the message that was in that first block, and the reason of its creation, then I think some form of enlightenment comes in. They understand the world around them much better and what's actually happening versus what the media is telling them and the narrative. And to your point, the same cycle repeating over and over. But this gives an option to come out of that.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to the idea of sort of voice and exit. And I think the cycle you just referred to, right? That's the idea of anti-cyclosis or the Polybius cycle, which is these patterns of human organization. At its core, I think a lot of people try to use blockchain or like tokens to resolve social coordination issues. And yes, there are a lot of coordination issues you can ameliorate partly using technology, but coordination issues at their core are about politics and power. And as long as humans are humans, like politics and power dynamics will exist. They exist in this industry like any other. So I think it's a bit naive to say that using technology you can completely obviate politics and power dynamics between groups of humans. I think you can build a world where there is more transparency and people have choice. And I think the choice component's what's so important here. Like, so you mentioned the current world we're living in. Last financial crisis, I was graduating from college. I'd never thought about money, really, right? Like, in the sense that I had never really questioned that I had dollars in my bank account at JP Morgan Chase. And when I went to Chase and like put my little debit card in the thing, I got out the cash, and then I, went to the bar or whatever I was doing as a senior in college and like got my $1 beer or whatever it was. Yeah, but you never had really thought about an alternative to I have dollars and they're in my bank and that's how my life works. Yeah. This time around, there's an option, and it's not dollars and it's not going to the bank. There's the third option that hasn't existed before, which is this new form of money. And so that to me is in and of itself extremely powerful. Like, ideas are the most dangerous thing. Ideas are more dangerous than anything else. And so I think what you see with the regulatory response to Bitcoin is people starting to recognize the idea is out, right? People get it. So what are you going to do? I feel badly for regulators because this tenuous grasp they've had on power through their control of the money supply and their monopoly on violence is being questioned. You look at these riots against police brutality, that is a direct challenge to the state's monopoly on violence. And so Bitcoin, in a way, is a challenge to the state's monopoly on money. Right. And that's crazy.
Yeah, crazy. It's really it's such a huge disruption, maybe the largest ever, right? If you think about the disruptions with, the horse and buggy disrupted by the car, and the internet disrupting Yellow Pages and whatever, right? Now money, finance being disrupted, I think probably the largest because it's global. And it's there's people who are unbanked in the world and underbanked, and this now gives them some power. So on that note,
but hold on, I want to go beyond that for a second. So it's not just about money. One misconception that people have is Bitcoin's about money. I don't fundamentally believe that. What the internet did, the greatest revolutions in human history, sort of the greatest periods of advancement in human history, have come from new technology innovation. But at the core of all technology is how we communicate. Right? So in the beginning, you had one-to-one communication. Then with the advent of the printing press, you started to grow, the audience you could communicate to. I would argue that architecture was another such form of communication. Art was like a very subversive form of communication. Then you got the printing press. Then you got the phone. Then you got the internet. Now you have a new communication protocol. It's called the Bitcoin network. What it communicates is immutable record of value, right? It's an immutable record of UTXOs. And so what's really interesting, and I think an important way to sort of shift your thinking, if you think about what authoritarian regimes try to do, They control communication.
Sure.
And they control information because they realize the ability to control who communicates with whom, what is communicated, and how it's communicated, that is power in our digital world. And what I think, again, is so interesting about Bitcoin is Bitcoin at its core is a communication network. And so these efforts you see, like even in our country, our government wants to break encryption.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, recently I believe they passed a bill, if I'm not mistaken, or...
It's not passed yet. Okay. Call your representative, EFF.org. Okay. Go protest, fight. The Earn It bill is like the worst bill in the record of human history. It's terrible.
So on that note, obviously we saw Trump put out anti-Bitcoin tweets, and almost in a way he has to, given the U.S. dollar status. But
wait, were they anti-Bitcoin tweets?
Yeah, he tweeted that Bitcoin and other crypto are not real money and have been used for nefarious activities and so on and so forth. So he didn't say anything about banning it and so forth, but his stance was pretty much not real money, not worth your time. And then,
because he is dependent on the biggest illusion ever, right, which is that the dollar has value, like a piece of paper has value, right? So look, I think actually what Trump said was really interesting in some ways, and then what Stephen Mnuchin came out and said afterwards. What they said is, some people want to have Bitcoin, cool. If you're going to run a Bitcoin business in the United States of America, you need to comply with our laws, which, by the way, fine, right? I actually thought it was not anti-Bitcoin. I thought it was actually super neutral.
I don't know, maybe I read it in that way, from the crypto lens, and like, wait a minute. But at the end of the day, like I said, they're not banning it, so the balance of that is they're not doing anything to really stifle the innovation around or the building, because the world's largest Bitcoin mining is being built in Texas, and Fidelity and all these folks are in the market now, Paul Tudor Jones. So it's interesting, and like I said, it possibly because of the U.S. dollar's reserve status, he has to come out, and it's kind of like Warren Buffett coming out and saying, I don't care about Bitcoin, because he's made his billions on other things. He doesn't necessarily care for it or need to use it at this age. So I'm just curious around your thoughts, and I think if you could take us behind the curtain, because you testified before Congress talking about Libra and Bitcoin and so forth, and what that process was like, and do you see maybe crypto regulations coming this year, given Steve Mnuchin's comments?
Yeah, so look, I'll start by saying, like, I'm not a lobbyist, I'm not a politician. I think my primary function in that congressional hearing was to bring the perspective of the Bitcoin community to the extent that one can, because the great thing about Bitcoin is, like, there's no CEO of Bitcoin. There's no one person who has the authority to speak on behalf of the community. So I did my best to sort of broadly represent what's happening in Europe, what's happening in the US with all of the different companies I've invested in and worked with over the years. It's like I tried to broadly represent what I see happening in this industry, which is I see an emerging industry that employs tens of thousands of people in the United States, that generates, capital for businesses in the United States, and that is a center of economic activity. And I also see, a lot of capital, flowing out of the United States to other jurisdictions that are more permissive, which I think is a big miss. So look, I think there are a lot of people in DC who speak the language of DC. So again, just going back to what we're good at, my job really is I try to be a translator. So I get to sort of sit at this interesting place where I look at a lot of different things. So I have one foot in sort of the traditional sort of global macros for finance community. I have one foot in the crypto trading community, one foot in sort of the startup ecosystem, what's going on with protocols, what's happening with regulators. So I get this broad perspective. So I get to sort of look at all of this, identify the common threads, and then sort of relay that to these different audiences. So that's my function. And there are a lot of other people like that. I think there are a bunch of organizations. Coin Center, I have a lot of respect for, and I think has done a good job educating people on the Hill. They really helped me with sort of reviewing the testimony I'd written and sort of helping me sort of, understand the general temperature and what words people understand, don't understand. So I think Coin Center is doing a great job. I think there are some congressmen and women that are doing a great job. Notably, I think Congressman Davidson from Ohio, who had asked me the shitcoin question that I think a lot of people thought was so funny. He's done a really good job. Congressman McHenry has done a great job. I think, on the Democratic side, we haven't had as much support for the industry, but I'm hopeful that in the next cycle, we'll see more pro-crypto, pro-Bitcoin candidates, which, by the way, I think will be a great election strategy. So I think, there are people who are doing that work at those levels. And I think we will see candidates in the future who run on a pro-crypto or pro-Bitcoin platform. But I think at the end of the day, politics are about power, and power is about politics. And at the end of the day, right, the game we're playing here, it's the game for hegemony, and it's a game that the United States has been winning for the last 70 years, arguably. We've managed to export our inflation abroad through this beautiful thing known as the petrodollar. But now for the first time, we have competition. It's real competition in the form of, a superpower known as China, who owns a lot of the world's debt, and owns a lot of infrastructure, and is now working on deploying a DCP, their own digital currency. So I think competition and sort of political forces will force the US to compete, even if they don't want to. And at the end of the day, it's not about being right, it's about being practical, and it's about winning. And so if crypto can be utilized in a way that helps the US political apparatus win, it's going to be utilized in that manner. And so, we'll see how people twist and bend the narrative to suit their objectives. And again, the only thing I would say is go forth and prosper, do your thing, innovate away. But Bitcoin is Bitcoin, and let's not confuse the facts and circumstances. There is no other Bitcoin. There is no thing that is just like Bitcoin. There's Bitcoin, and then there's everything else. And those things should be evaluated on their own merits. But I think a lot of people, will lobby and say oh, this is just like Bitcoin. It's that just needs to stop. It's nothing like Bitcoin. Doesn't mean it's good or bad. It's not a value judgment. It's just don't confuse whatever it is you're trying to achieve with what's already happening here, which is completely different.
And by the way, you did a great job with your testimony. A lot of folks enjoyed your speech, and I think you tried your best in a sense to communicate to folks who don't get the technology. So I have to say, really great job. And I wanted to ask, did you volunteer? Were you asked to come speak about that? Or what was that process like?
Yeah, so a big shout out to Andy Bromberg, the founder and CEO of CoinList. He had been working with Congressman McHenry's office. Congressman McHenry is the Republican chair of the House of Financial Services Committee, which is the committee that hosted the hearing. And so his office, his staffers, so the way it works is the majority party, the Democrats, they run the committee, and then the Republicans have their own sort of part of the committee. The majority party gets to invite the majority of the witnesses. So the Democrats invited 4 witnesses, and then the Republicans, which are the minority party, got to invite 1 witness. And so I think they originally had reached out to Andy and we're chatting with him, and he was like, hey, I know a person who I think would be really great for this and just has a really unique perspective. And so, talked with McHenry's office on a Friday afternoon at 6 p.m. I was excited. I think I was getting ready to make a margarita. I was it's been a long week. Baby girl's gonna have a margarita. I had that call, and I was like, guess I'm not having a margarita. Submitted the written testimony on a Monday, and then I think on Wednesday was the hearing. So yeah, that's kind of the cycle. And there have been a number of hearings before that, and there will be more hearings and have been hearings since then. But I thought that was just a really important moment, because we got to sort of steal the limelight from Libra and talk about Bitcoin, and I thought that was exciting. Yeah,
very cool. I love folks like yourself who are well-versed, well-spoken, and can go in front of these folks and educate them. I think we need more of that, more advocates and the circles and rubbing shoulders with these politicians to help guide them, I think, because many are still not sure what they want to do or don't understand it. Warren Davidson, Darren Soto, those guys, I know they've been pushing for crypto regulation, so shout out to them. Tell me about Coinshares. What's the history of the company? What do you guys do? Who are your clients and so forth?
Yeah, so Coinshares is a little bit of an interesting company. So when I started in this industry, I worked at Digital Currency Group, and in those days, it was like 6 people, and we were not even called Digital Currency Group really yet. And so one of the things I learned through growing that business over the course of 3 years, there's a lot of different approaches you can take to building businesses in this industry. I think one of the things that's always been really interesting to me is like there are a lot of people who run funds, and I think a fund is a lot of work, it's a lot of fun, it's definitely very rewarding, but a fund is a very specific type of activity. And I've always been more drawn towards running businesses, because I think one of the really interesting things about this space is the interconnected relationship between the technology and the infrastructure you're using, the products you're creating, the way you bring those products to market. So there's all of these sort of really interesting integration opportunities where if you have a business that has multiple different business lines, you can make the sum of the parts worth more than the whole. And so I joined Coinshares in the middle of 2018 after having known the team for a bit. At that point in time, we're primarily known for our exchange traded products, XBT provider. We, we're about 8 people at that point in time, like figuring it out like everyone else. And the business sort of grew astronomically at the end of 2017, early 2018, and then following the rest of the market, we saw that downswing in asset prices. What Coinshares is at its core, it's a financial services business. We have multiple products and services that cater to investors of different types who want exposure to the digital asset class, whether that's through owning one of our exchange traded products, which provides passive single asset exposure, so it's passive beta exposure. The idea, like the name Coinshares, comes from the idea that it would be click, point, click buy Bitcoin in the form of a share. So on any brokerage platform you're using, you could get exposure really quickly, really easily. And there's kind of this progression where at the top of the funnel, people sort of start with the easiest access point, and then they go down this proverbial rabbit hole. And then as they learn, they start seeking out more specific types of products and services that are more specific to sort of their risk appetite and their level of comfort with holding their own keys, et cetera. So exchange traded products, active strategies, so venture, actively traded, credit. And then we also have our trading sort of platform. So there we have been doing a lot of really interesting stuff around providing liquidity as a service and really connectivity to crypto markets via Fix API, which I think is something that's been missing. Like a lot of trading in this space is very manual. Like you call someone on the phone to execute a trade. Our team has done an amazing job building systems, electronic systems that scale, that provide people the ability to trade in our order flow, and we trade a lot. So, we get great rates and are able to share those with our institutional clients. So at the highest level, we're a products and services business. And I think really the vision for the business is like, how do we be that gateway between people who want to get exposure to the asset class through different sort of strategies and give people a trusted, transparent, sort of reputable touch point, and then put a wrapper around it so that it looks, feels, smells, tastes like any other asset they might interact with. So that's Coinshares in a nutshell. It's a fun business. It's a challenging business, but it's definitely been an adventure over the last 2 years, and it continues to be just a weird and wild and fun ride.
And what type of institutional clients? Is it pension funds, family houses, offices, things like that?
Yeah, so it's a really wide range. I would say historically, the investors that have allocated to Bitcoin have been high net worth clients, semi-professional traders who, are more educated than most about markets and how to interact with markets. We've seen now, larger asset managers, RIAs, registered investment advisors, wealth advisors starting to come onto the platform. We have hedge funds, endowments, pensions who interact with the products. And then we're starting to see sovereign wealth funds and other types of allocators getting involved. It's always interesting to see the types of people engaging in Bitcoin behind the scenes, and then sort of what's out in public. I know earlier this year when Paul Tudor Jones, shared that he was allocating to Bitcoin out of his fund. That was a great announcement. The one that people missed that I actually thought was more important, though, was Rentech, or Renaissance Technologies, the best performing quantitative hedge fund of all time. One of their funds has like consistently delivered double-digit % growth every single year since inception, which is unheard of in the quant space. They also announced in March that they're trading in Bitcoin futures and options, the CME cash settled products, not physically settled products yet. But I thought that was actually a huge announcement that HFTs, high frequency trading firms, and quant shops were starting to interact with the asset class. And then you see it, right? I think 2020 is the year where derivatives volume is going to flip spot volume, meaning derivatives volume will far exceed the physically traded spot market. And so I think that is all sort of a sign of the financialization of Bitcoin, with more professional firms getting into the industry in these different ways. And a lot of times in a risk neutral way, where they're not taking a long-term perspective, they're really just arbing the volatility around Bitcoin.
Yeah, I missed that one, the hedge fund you noted there. And I thought Paul Tudor Jones coming in, because it just got the major headlines, was kind of the green flag for the rest of Wall Street and the rest of these institutions to get in. And seems like the institutional demand is growing. And I'm sure you guys are seeing that on your end, right?
Yeah, I think yes and no. Look, we've been talking about institutions since like 2018. At the end of the day, I think the process is still, it's a long cycle. We've sort of internally mapped out, what the life cycle of an investor's process sort of looks like. And I do think it's a fairly long cycle. Typically, also, people will start by making a PA or personal allocation investment. So like Paul Tudor Jones, his first touch point was probably PA allocation. And there are many hedge fund managers, by the way, like Stanley Druckenmiller, who, again, has never had a down year, like one of the most respected macro investors of all time. Like Druckenmiller had PA exposure to Bitcoin, talked about it. Alan Howard, PA exposure to Bitcoin, talks about it. Adam Levinson, PA exposure. Mike Novogratz, right, coming from Fortress, started with being allocated out of his PA or personal account through his family office, and then set up Galaxy and built this whole firm around his family office. So I think for a lot of people who are allocators, it starts with their personal interest, and then it like becomes this all-consuming sort of thing, and then they get the firm or the fund into it. So I think it's going to be a trickle rather than like this wave that flows in. The other thing that's important to remember, again, is the money is not always going to be net long. Right? Sure. So like it's not necessarily going to be people like buying Bitcoin. I think some of it's also going to be people looking at yield, looking at credit, looking at infrastructure investing in the form of data centers. Semiconductors are having a great year from a regulatory perspective, with Congress passing a bill to fund semiconductor R&D, a lot of chip fab moving back onshore. Like there are all of these different parts of the Bitcoin ecosystem that I think are seeing capital inflows in different ways from different parts of the investing ecosystem, because not every investor is going to be the type of investor that's going to hold Bitcoin directly on their balance sheet. A lot of investors are going to look for different ways to play the space and to manage and mitigate risk, as well as sort of their outlook. In terms of duration, Bitcoin's definitely a secular investment. So a lot of people who buy and hold it have a longer term outlook, but most investment firms will have mandates that aren't necessarily, 5 or 10 year mandates. And so for them, they're looking for different exposure strategies. And again, it's good to see, 4 years ago, last halving, you could only be long Bitcoin. It's very hard to go short Bitcoin in size. Yeah. Now there's a robust two-sided market. I think actually open interest right now is net short. So it's interesting to see how the growth of the derivatives market has in a lot of ways fueled the ability for institutions to access Bitcoin. But in a lot of cases, it doesn't necessarily mean that number go up, right?
Got it. That absolutely makes sense, given the derivatives aspect of it. So does Coinshares only provide exposure to Bitcoin or other cryptos like Ethereum, XRP, maybe the top 10, things along those lines?
Yeah, I would say, so in our exchange trader products, XBT provider, Bitcoin is obviously the most popular product. We have around 800 million in assets under management in those ETPs. You can find more information about them at coinshares.com, which is our website. We also have an Ethereum Tracker that's really popular. Obviously, that saw a lot of inflows in late 2017, early 2018. And I think there are a lot of people who are excited to own Ether in their portfolio. portfolio. We did launch a Ripple and a Litecoin product in early 2019. Those have not been as popular, but really as a company, we respond to what our investors and our clients want. So obviously Bitcoin, most popular, Ether, very popular. The next most popular requests were Ripple and Litecoin. So we created those products, but from an inflows perspective, they haven't seen much traction.
Got it, got it. I'm sure in the next bull cycle, there's probably going to be more demand across the board, and as new coins start performing well. So on that, I'm sorry, did you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, and I would just say it's not just about providing people with exposure to the coins themselves. We also have a venture strategy that I think has been, venture has been really popular. We see a lot more allocation to venture overall. We also see people getting interested in credit and sort of income opportunities, particularly in a 0 interest rate environment, or potentially, with interest rates in some parts of the world trending negative. So I think, again, as the industry continues to mature, the investable universe also continues to expand. So at Coinshares, our mandate isn't just like, hey, assets themselves, but it's also what are all the different parts of the capital structure that you can invest in: equity, debt, and tokens, or the digital assets themselves. And then how do we, again, package that into a product that investors want? Our job is catering to our clients and what they need and what they want and how they can interact with it. And so a lot of it's just kind of doing the magical dance and trying to figure out, what do people want? How can we create that product and fit it into a regulatory structure where they can access it through the places where they're already interacting with their portfolio, so that they don't need to figure out how to use a hardware wallet, because that's too high of a barrier, right?
Sure. So I not really a price prediction, but if you want to give a price prediction, you certainly can. Not financial investment advice, of course, but where do you see Bitcoin in the next 2 to 5 years or so? Given the halving cycles, the 4-year cycles that we've seen, any thoughts or predictions there?
Sure. So Howard Marks, the famous investor, he always says you can name a date and not a price, or you can name a price and not a date.
Sure.
So my prediction for Bitcoin is it will be worth more in 10 years than it's worth today. That's my optimistic goal, because I own Bitcoin, and obviously my firm's heavily dependent on Bitcoin in some ways for success. But what I would say is, look, the way I look at Bitcoin is there's sort of this idea of cyclical versus secular investing. We're sort of at the end of one investment cycle, right? We had an 11-year bull market in U.S. equities, basically from the last financial crisis through to March. We had the longest bull run ever in market history. I think 11 years and 2 months. I'll have to check the math. Anyways, over 11 years, long time. So that there is a cyclical trend. A secular trend, is something like Bitcoin. From the inception of Bitcoin to where it is today, obviously has appreciated materially, but in between there, it's been extremely volatile. And so my bet is Bitcoin in many ways has a binary outcome. It's either worth nothing or it's worth more than nothing. And at the end of the day, if you believe that Bitcoin has the potential to be a global open financial network, which I fundamentally believe in, then that's a secular sort of theme or trend. And so my perspective on Bitcoin is, for myself, I don't really try to trade it. I'm not very good at being right all the time. I can only be directionally correct. I'm not a quant. I'm not a trader. It's not my function. And so my view is, if you believe in the secular idea of Bitcoin as an idea, as a concept, as a technology, as protocol, as store value, then taking a long-term secular investing approach makes sense. And I think you also see that reflected in on-chain activity. The percent of Bitcoin that have been in the wallet they're in for more than a year has gone from 30% this time last year to 60% this time this year. The amount of Bitcoin moved off exchanges has increased significantly. So there's less Bitcoin held on exchanges now than there was a year ago, which I think is a function of people, less interested in playing the market and more interested potentially in finding secure ways to store their Bitcoin long term. So I'm very much a believer in the secular trend of Bitcoin. And so the approach I take personally is, investing in the overall theme, as opposed to trying to time my entry and my exit. But different ways to play for everyone. Some people want to go on BitMEX and, you know, get that sweet leverage. So the great thing is that for whatever you want to do, there's product out there. And if it doesn't exist, I'm sure if you ask, someone will be able to direct you to it. That's the beauty of open source money.
Great answer, Meltem. I like how you dodged that price prediction question. You've probably been asked it a lot.
I'm a professional. This is what I do for a living. Thanks, Tony.
So the next question I want to ask you is Bitcoin scalability. We've heard talks of the Lightning Network, and we know Bitcoin's core purpose and the value and the pros and so forth. But there are folks who question, given like what happened in the last bull run of 2017, network gets very clogged, fees get high, a bit slow. That doesn't happen all the time. But still, if it continues to grow, the market grows. What do you think about that? And have you heard any talks about how the Lightning Network can maybe scale? I know it's the technical aspect of it, but maybe some light you can shed.
Yeah, let's just start with at a high level. The fact that block space is expensive, I think, is important. And the reason it is that way is, so before, you know, how I talked about Bitcoin as a communication protocol, I think in a communication protocol, right, this network has limited bandwidth. And so there's a fee market based on how much people are willing to pay to relay their message. And you can, you know, attach a bigger transaction fee to your transaction if you wanted to get mined sooner, and you can sort of determine the priority, or you can attach no fee and then it goes into the mempool and you hope it eventually gets mined, right? I've definitely done that. I've sent like 0 fee transactions being cheap and then but there being a market for block space is, I think, inherently, you know, it's very important to Bitcoin. At Coinshares, we actually do Bitcoin mining research reports around the state of the Bitcoin network and how much CapEx and OpEx goes into maintaining the, you know, network of computers around the world and ASICs around the world that maintain the security and integrity of the Bitcoin network. So I think when we talk about scalability of Bitcoin, a lot of people think it means creating more block space or making block space cheaper. And I actually think that's antithetical to the security guarantees that Bitcoin provides. I think the reason that Bitcoin, you know, has the reputation it does and the trust it does is because it's highly secure. And so, you know, Bitcoin is immutable, Ethereum is not immutable. And I don't say that in a political way, it's just a fact, right? It's like, look at what happened in 2017. And that doesn't mean that I don't hold Ether or don't think Ether has value. It just means that I think the two networks in terms of what they're aiming to do are very different. So block space being expensive and having a cost is important to ensuring that people utilize the network in a sort of appropriate manner, right? Like if you could put anything on the Bitcoin network for free, like it would be full of dog shit, right? It would be full of rare Pepes and memes.
Yes.
That's what would happen. It probably already is. So I'll start with that is I think when people talk about scalability, they forget why block space has to have a price. The second thing I would say is when we talk about scalability, there's sort of like not a trade-off, but what are you attempting to do, right? The argument I get a lot is like, okay, Bitcoin can only process 7 transactions per second. Visa can process 10,000. I've heard that at least 1 million times in the last 5 years, right? And then the other one people say is like, oh, I don't want to wait 10 minutes for block to confirm so I can buy my coffee. And it's like, okay, that's not the point here. Like Bitcoin is not so you can buy your coffee. That's not an interaction where you need Bitcoin because you know the coffee shop, like you're there physically in person, you're not trying to preserve your anonymity or your pseudonymity, I should say. Like that use case is not necessarily really a good one to use for Bitcoin. Like use your credit card, use cash, use whatever. Like that's sort of a weird example. I'm always like, why are you buying coffee with Bitcoin? Like use the money that is worthless in your pocket. Please help yourself. Help me help you. Use your own damn money to buy your coffee. So I think, again, a lot of times when I hear these arguments is people not being very specific about the use case we're talking about.
Sure.
If we're talking about making Bitcoin widely usable as payment rail or payment network, then I think something like Lightning, you know, love Lightning, huge investor in the Lightning ecosystem, believe in it. But again, still very early, a lot of work to be done there,
Sure.
A lot of technical challenges to sort of building out the Lightning ecosystem. But I think Lightning's one such solution. The other thing is like, what are you trying to accomplish? In a lot of instances, like use an existing payment network. There are a lot of very centralized sort of permission database oriented blockchains that have really fast transactions and are oriented towards payments use cases, like great, use those. I think, again, just being very specific about why you're using Bitcoin, what you're trying to accomplish is important. Like for me, I don't transact with Bitcoin. Like I'm not going to my coffee shop to try to spend Bitcoin to like make a point. I did that in 2015 and I ate some very expensive meals. I think one of the burritos I had, because I had extra guacamole, is probably like $1,000 burrito today. So, don't get extra guac is my message. Save your sats. But again, I think when people talk about these scalability issues, I guess before you delve into the technicalities, right, it's like very easy to throw out counter evidence and be like, 7 transactions per second. And I'm like, but what are we trying to accomplish?
Right.
Like nobody's trying to say, let's make a global network for paying for coffee. Like get your Starbucks coin in your Starbucks wallet and do that all day. Like that's not what the point of Bitcoin is, in my view. And that's one.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think entirely different use case. And we can obviously talk about that, the hedge and digital gold, store of value, all of those things. What are your thoughts around what seems to be a Bitcoin mining rush, kind of a gold rush 2.0 taking place in the US, kind of flowing under the radar a bit, but you got Peter Thiel's Layer 1, you got Windstone in Texas claiming they're building the world's largest Bitcoin mining farm. And there's, sure they're going to the cheapest energy spots, but it's happening in the US. What are your thoughts around that?
That's a great question. I have a whole hour-long presentation around securing financial networks and the future of compute and connectivity. Some people might remember this little company called Enron. And a lot of people know Enron because of the Arthur Andersen accounting scandal. But before that, Enron was doing something really interesting. They were making energy trading digital, like electronically driven. But more importantly, one of the things they were really focused on was trying to create all sorts of digital commodities. So if you'll recall, like 2000s massive internet boom. And the thing that I think the guys at Enron saw but executed on poorly, but I have to give them credit for this idea, is that there would be a market for compute and connectivity. And I think Bitcoin, again, this is why I describe Bitcoin as a communication network. If you think about Bitcoin as a communication network, what it effectively means is through the financialization of Bitcoin, you're effectively creating a marketplace for compute and connectivity in the form of block space. And this, again, is why block space has to have value. So everything that's happening in the mining space is super fun. It's very much like what I lived through in my oil and gas days. Like, so for the first time, my old life is actually useful in some sort of way. We're heavily sort of involved in all of this mining activity. If anyone ever wants to talk mining, give me a shout. But look, part of this is also political, right? Right now, one of the big criticisms of Bitcoin is a lot of mining activities located in China. If communication and sort of dominance in this new world means being able to control who can access networks, how they access them, what they communicate, and who they communicate it to, then arguably control of the Bitcoin network is also important. And we've already seen, some interesting sort of vertical integration strategies where an exchange will integrate with a mining pool and their transactions will get processed faster than everyone else's because they're directing their transactions directly into the mining pool. And so, like, I think people are starting to recognize there is a relationship between the digital stuff we consume and physical infrastructure, right? Like, the reason you have Wi-Fi in your house is not because there's magical Wi-Fi dust in the air. It's because there's cable that runs under your house that connects to a jack in your house that you connect your router to, and then you configure your router, and then you have connectivity access. Similarly, I think people are starting to think more and more about the relationship of physical infrastructure and this digital Bitcoin network. What's really cool about Bitcoin is it's the largest private telecommunications network. So I kind of think of it that way, right? And so what you're seeing is the private build out of this massive global financial network. And so it makes a lot of sense that private money is going to flow into it. I think overall, like the data center, compute, and connectivity space is having a banner year. If you look at Intel, NVIDIA, everyone from semiconductors to data centers to connectivity, great year. It's become heavily politicized. Will continue to be very politicized. And I wouldn't be surprised if, 5 years from now, 40% of mining capacity was onshore US.
Wow. I'm excited to see that happen, of course. Long Bitcoin, of course. You mentioned you hold Ethereum in your portfolio. What do you think about the DeFi movement? I know I don't consider you a Bitcoin maximalist, because there are Bitcoin maximalists who will say, DeFi is crap, this is crap. But I think you seem to have a balance because you have other things in your portfolio. But what do you think about the DeFi movement?
Yeah, look, I love it. I love it from many perspectives. Like, number one, it's super fun. I think the ideas that people are coming up with, this idea of like building Lego blocks for money and sort of composability around different banking functions is really interesting. It actually mirrors a trend that's been going on in the fintech space for a long time, which is unbundling the bank into its core functions and then offering those core functions as a service. So one of the things I always say is like Wall Street is kind of having its AWS moment, where people are starting to think about like, how do I take these massive financial institutions with massive back office, mid office infrastructure, et cetera, unbundle them and make them available via API as sort of a software layer. And I think that's a lot of what I'm investing in, excited about from sort of a Coinshares perspective. What we're really thinking about is like, what does that new world look like? And so I think what's been cool to see in the DeFi space is just the different ways that people are innovating and just the rapid proliferation of really interesting ideas. I think a lot of it's also just like, it's basically the new ICO, right? So people will be like, oh, this is my token, it's a DeFi token. Then people are like, oh my God, DeFi token. And it like pumps 10x and everyone loses their minds. I can't play that game. Like, I just don't have the time to play that game. There's some people who are playing that game and crushing it. And I love that. And I want to invest in all their funds because they're probably going to make a lot of money. For a short period of time, right? I think DeFi is kind of like the ICO craze, where it's like a temporary dislocation in the market where a lot of cool stuff's happening very quickly. A lot of people are trying to capitalize on it in this new way. So that'll happen for a while, but eventually it'll all get arbed out. And I think with a DeFi, we just made our first DeFi investment, by the way. We haven't announced it yet, but I'm really excited about it. Where we're sort of sitting, like my personal view is like, yay, DeFi, like hilarious, awesome, great memes also. Memes are big for me. Great community, super passionate people, like rapid building, rapid prototyping. When it comes to scaling and building and sort of figuring out how to give these ideas permanence and sort of help them grow in a way that isn't just predicated on like memes and hype, I think that's a very different story. There, I think you're starting to see platforms sort of looking at, okay, like how do we fit what we're doing into an existing sort of regulatory structure? Is there some sort of way that this works within the existing way that capital markets regulation or securities regulation or securities law works? If it doesn't, like, how do we create a paradigm where that's possible? So I think there are a lot of sort of interesting edges being explored there. And actually, I think in a way, what's happening is the DeFi movement, more so than anything else, is causing our phone to ring because financial institutions are calling us. They're like, we don't know what's going on. They kind of almost don't care what's going on. They're just like, look, there are a lot of people over here like talking about over collateralized lending, and we like high margin businesses, and there's all this like juicy fat margin laying around over here, so we want a slice of that. And so I think, again, success is the sort of the greed and success kind of like go together in the crypto space. As DeFi and sort of these things become very profitable, I think you'll see more and more firms coming in trying to find ways to sort of take a slice of the action, as you have with everything else in sort of the history of crypto. But I'm excited. I follow it. A few projects that I'm really excited about. I'm not an investor in any of these. I wish I was. Credmark, I think super cool. They used to be called Gray Chain, but they're doing on-chain like analytics, kind of trying to think of a way to give people like a trust score almost, or look at their on-chain activities. So in this world of like pseudonymity, where you don't necessarily have an identity, how do I sort of, give you a score of some sort so that I know what type of agent or actor you are on the network, and the engagement your wallet has had with other wallet addresses. So I think that's interesting. There's another company called Aave that probably everyone knows, but it's an under collateralized lending protocol. So it's kind of this idea of like creating a liquidity pool and then allowing that liquidity pool to be used for uncollateralized or under collateralized lending. So I think as we talk about DeFi sort of addressing this market need for capital in areas where people don't have access to capital, you know, crypto collateralized loans are one thing. Like I would do that all day because it's basically riskless.
Yeah.
As long as you manage, you know, the collateral well and you manage the margin well. But I think on the under collateralized side, like we're now starting to see people moving in that direction, which I think is really cool. And then eventually like fully uncollateralized would be really interesting. So I'm excited about stuff like that. And then things around decentralized asset management. So making it possible for people to like post their portfolios online, tokenize them, and enable people to participate in investing on a micro scale. So without all like the administrative and operational compliance hurdles that we have running more traditional regulated funds. And then the last area that I'm super pumped about, it's not quite DeFi, is prediction markets and information markets. Being an avid sci-fi reader, like people have played around with revenue tokens or like income share agreements, like clearly security. And like, also, I don't want to share my money with someone. Why would I do that? It's dumb. What I want is a reputation market for people so that I can like sell my reputation. Like, it gets very dark and very dystopian very quickly.
Right.
But I think, you know, the world we're getting to, there's this great blog post called Status as a Service by this blogger, Eugene Wei. But I think this idea, like humans are status seeking. And if you can find a way to sort of monetize status and make it a gambling game, that starts to become really compelling. So I just think generally like everything at the end of the day is a type of value, is a type of energy. How do you convert that into a marketplace? I think is interesting. Like, at my core, you know, I started my career as a trader. There's like my inner degen, just like, I want to be in the troll box. I want to be like doing, you know, my trading. So I think that's going to be really, really cool. A few projects to watch there: Polymarket, Hedge Trade, super cool. And then I think what Numerai/Erasure are doing with creating a global data market for sourcing data for staking rewards, pretty cool as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm certainly bullish on the DeFi movement. I do believe 1.0 has some flaws. We've seen some security issues, but all things 1.0, they're going to have flaws. You just got to get to the next version and fine tune it, right?
But also just like do not put a shitload of money into a DeFi thing, have it break, and then be like, oh, I'm going to sue you. It's like, it's like using Lightning. Like there's $200 transaction limit for a reason.
Right.
Because it's experimental. DeFi doesn't have these transaction limits. And so people are doing like, you know, a lot of size. And I'm like,
yeah,
just know that there's risk. But I also think that like all of this FUD around like, oh, DeFi is going to blow up, blah, blah, like that's also over exaggerated. I think there are some people who are like very negative about the whole thing.
Right.
And I don't get it. I'm like, people are like doing their thing. Let them do their thing. You're not about it. Like, what do you get by being so salty? Like, let them live.
Yeah.
Let the people live.
So the XRP community definitely wanted me to ask you this. What are your thoughts on what Ripple is doing with XRP and cross-border payments and PayID, if you have any comments around that?
I honestly, I'm not really involved at all in Ripple. I don't really track what's going on with XRP. You know, I think the vision for XRP is super ambitious. I am of the mind that I do believe that we're going to build a new type of correspondent banking system that's not going to be built on, you know, Swift rails and ACH. I think it'll be built on synthetic dollar stable coin rails, whether that's things like Tether that are fully collateralized, or USDC, or, you know, name your stable coin here, or things like DAI, or, you know, other sort of automated market makers that create a synthetic dollar peg. Like, doesn't really matter to me, but I do think there's a huge demand around the world for dollars, not for XRP, not even for Bitcoin, not for Ether. Like, what people want are dollars. They want dollars.
Interesting.
And so we'll find different ways to create synthetic dollars. And I do think delivering them, you know, I think DAI is a product that's had a lot of product market fit in the sense that you can create a synthetic dollar pegged asset based on this sort of collateralized system. It's not perfect, obviously, and there are a lot of questions around sort of its long-term sustainability, its ability to grow. So yeah, I'm not convinced that, you know, 10 years from now, I'm going to be transacting in all XRP and XRP is going to rule the world. But I certainly wouldn't be surprised if that team is heavily involved in some of the stable coin sort of central bank digital currency efforts we see around the world.
Got it. So, Couple more questions here and we'll wrap it up. I got to talk about the hot sauces that you tweeted about. You have 12? And you keep them in the fridge?
More. So I just had, before this interview, you guys, I feel so bad. When we first got on the video, I was really hungry. It was like 4:30 here and I was like shoveling food into my face hole, which is what happens during quarantine. So I had my delicious black bean taco. So I have fridge hot sauces. And then there are like non-fridge hot sauces, right? So like Cholula, always in the house.
Yes.
Cholula's legit. Tabasco, do not like, but also in the house because you have to have it.
Yeah. Okay. You get a pass for that one.
Tabasco is like too vinegary for me. I think Cholula has more of like the spice, you know? I like the spice. So Cholula, Tabasco, then sriracha, always. 2 types, the stuff in the squeeze bottle, and then the sambal oelek, which is the paste with the flakes that comes in a jar.
Oh, yeah.
That's the good right there. And then I've recently become absolutely, utterly, and hopelessly addicted to Secret Aardvark. I don't know if you're a Secret Aardvark fan. Secret Aardvark is I want to say New Orleans hot sauce. $7 a bottle, not fancy, but it is like an explosion of flavor in your mouth. I love it. I eat one like 16 ounce. I don't know how big the bottles are. 8 ounce, 10 ounce, 12 ounce. I eat one bottle every 2 weeks on my own.
Oh my gosh.
Like I have problems with Secret Aardvark. It's so good. I put it on everything. And then also chili oil or chili crunch. Fly by Jing is my current favorite, but I have like 4 different types in the fridge. And then I have an assortment of different hot sauces. I don't love the super hot sauces. I like flavor. So it's like flavor with some heat. So I'm like a medium to medium hot girl. And then bird's eye chilies. I always have jalapenos and bird's eye chilies in my fridge. Like if I really want to jazz something up, I'll add a bird's eye chili to it. They're like the Thai little chilies. They're so good because the heat just hurts. And then the other secret ingredient for not spice, but like mouthfeel is Sichuan peppercorns.
Oh yeah.
Because they numb your mouth. So it has like this, I make this like bok choy dish with Sichuan peppercorns. It's kind of like a variation on dan dan noodles. And my mouth literally goes numb because I put a shitload of peppercorns in. And my partner is like, I don't think you're supposed to put, he's like, that's all peppercorns. Like, I'm not taking you to the ER again, Meltem. I'm like, no, it's fine.
Oh my gosh.
I can't feel my face. It's fine. Yeah.
It sounds like a weekend song there.
Yeah, I can't feel my face. Except it's not because I'm like out partying. It's because I'm sitting in my kitchen at like midnight cooking whatever's in my fridge. And I'm like, it tastes bad. So I just dump shit on it.
So do you really love your hot sauces, the takeaway there?
It's good. Like, you know how some people carry hot sauce or ranch dressing in their purse?
Yeah, yep.
I think I haven't used a purse in 5 months, but I think I'm becoming that woman where I'm going to walk around with a bottle of Secret Aardvark. I'm okay with it. I've come to terms with it. So.
All right, quick rapid fire and we'll wrap it up. What's your favorite food?
Pizza.
What's your favorite movie?
The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou.
Oh, I don't think I've heard of that. I gotta check that out.
Wes Anderson movie.
Nice. What as far as music, favorite band or musician?
Today, 9 Inch Nails.
Nice. Awesome. Meltem, great chatting with you. Learned a lot today and certainly would love to have you back on as things progress at Coinshares and, you know, you guys add some new features and so forth. Definitely want to have you back on to talk about it.
Yeah. Anytime you want to talk about the metaphysical or the soul of Bitcoin and whatever other dumb stuff I said, I'm happy to do that. Thanks for having me. Thanks for humoring me. Thanks for getting weird with me. Yeah, there's just so much like fun, weird, wacky stuff. You know, at my day job, I don't have to be, but you know, I'm more structured. So for me, it's fun to have these conversations and kind of let my freak flag fly a little.
Awesome.
Cool. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, Meltem.